So, this is lesson 3-3, using several transformations. So we are going to learn how to solve equations, but with more than one step. So let's start with the inverse property here. So we're going to talk about the inverse property. The inverse property. And the inverse property is basically undoing stuff. So let's do an example here. So let's say we have a number n. And let's say we multiply by 5. So we get 5n. And let's say we subtract 9. We subtract 9. And then we get 5n minus 9, right? We get 5n minus 9. But let's say we add 9 again. We add 9. So what do we get? We get 5n again. And let's say we divide by 5. Divide by 5. Oops. If we divide by 5, we get n again. So we started at n, we did a few operations, we did the inverse of these, and we got back to what we started with. So the inverse of multiplication, is division. So if we multiply n by 5, we get 5n. But then if we divide it by 5, we get n again. Because these two operations cancel each other out. We're undoing what we did by dividing what we multiplied. So that's why we get the same thing we started with. So that's basically what happened here. The inverse of multiplication is division. So we multiply by 5 and we get 5n. When we're at 5n, we divide by 5 and we get n. Okay. Well, the inverse of subtraction is addition. And vice versa. The inverse of addition is subtraction. The inverse of division is multiplication. So we did 5n minus 9. Okay, we get 5n minus 9. But then we add 9 again, and we get 5n. We get what we started with. Same as right here, except it's just adding. Let's say we convert this to adding and convert this to 5n minus 5. So, n minus 5. So n plus 5 is n plus 5. Right? And then we subtract 5, and we get n. The same thing we started with, we just get it over again because we are undoing what we just did. So that is the inverse property. So that's basically the new topic of the day. Let's do a few examples here. Let's do a few examples. So let's start out with this one. 1 minus x over 2 is equal to 7. So how do we solve this? So when we solve an equation, we always isolate the variable. So to isolate the variable, which is x here, the variable is x. To isolate this variable, we essentially have to use the inverse property. And we want to isolate 1 minus x. And to isolate that, we need to multiply this whole both sides by 2 so that we are canceling out the division by the multiplication. So if we multiply by 2, let me use a different color. If we multiply by 2, these two cancel out, so we get 1 minus x, and that's equal to 14. So now let's isolate this variable. We want to isolate Mr. X here. And to isolate him, we will have to subtract 1 from both sides. To get negative x, because we still attach this negative sign on the variable, negative x is equal to 13. So to isolate x, and we want to get rid of the negative, and the inverse of minus is plus. So we divide, so we're doing -1 times x, right? We're doing -1 times x, and that is -x. So if we divide the multiplication by the division, we cancel it out, and we get just x. So we do -1 divided by -1. So x is equal to -13. X is equal to -13. So that is the first problem. So that's the easiest one. Let's get into some harder problems. Let's do a couple more. So the next problem we're going to do is this one here. So the quantity x minus 13 minus the quantity x minus 5 plus 2x is equal to 0. So we just want to get rid of these parentheses so that we can combine like terms and combine these x's here. Because we have a lot of x's and we have a lot of numbers here. So we can combine them and get a shorter statement because this is huge. So let's first isolate this. X minus 13. So if we just cover this, if we just look at this side here, if we want to do x minus 13, we just have x minus 13. But since we have this negative sign here, we have to distribute the negative sign. We have to distribute the negative. So what we will do is we will do -x, because negative plus positive is negative, right? Negative times positive is always negative. So -x, but negative times negative is positive. So plus 5 plus 2x is equal to 0, right? So let's combine like terms here now. So we have x, a -x, and a positive 2x. And then we have a -13, positive 5. So let's combine the x's. So x minus x is equal to 0 because it's inverse. We're undoing each other. So we just have 2x. So 2x, and then -13 plus 5 is equal to -8 because -13 is larger. So we will have to keep the negative sign. So -8 is equal to 0. So now let's add 8 so that we can get rid of this 8 because we want to always isolate the variable, remember. We want to isolate the variable. And this is huge. Put a bunch of stars, underline it, box it, whatever. This is huge. You want to always isolate a variable when you solve an equation. That is your main goal. So we will use inverse property to isolate the variable because now we will add 8 to both sides so that we will get 2x is equal to 8. So we want to isolate the variable on one side. So the inverse of multiplication is division, so we will divide by 2 to get x is equal to 4. And that's the answer. Oops. So let's do one more here because I'm kind of running out of time now. Let's do one more. One more. So this is a kind of hard one. So 3 times the absolute value of n minus the quantity 2 times the absolute value of n minus 2 is equal to 9. Oh, what's this? Okay. Anyway, so remember, absolute value is the distance from a number to 0. So it's always positive. So even if you plug in a negative number here, it will be positive. If you plug in a positive number, you won't really change anything. So let's isolate the absolute values stuff because this whole thing is one term. So let's first distribute this negative sign. We'll distribute to the 2 times the absolute value n and to the -2. And we will get 3 times the absolute value of n minus 2 times the absolute value of n plus 2, because negative times negative is positive, is equal to 9. So now let's subtract this whole thing. Let's isolate this whole thing. So we will subtract 2 from both sides to get 3 times the absolute value of n minus 2 times the absolute value of n is equal to 7. So what we will get is 3 times a number minus 2 times a number is 1 times a number, right? Because if you have 3 dots and you subtract 2 dots, you will get 1 dot, right? So we will get 1 times the absolute value of n, which is basically just the absolute value of n. And that will be equal to 7. Move here. So, because of that, remember, absolute value is the distance from 0 to a number. So, if the absolute value of n is equal to 7, we can plug in 7 here and get 7. But we can also plug in negative 7, because this absolute value bar is going to change that negative number into a positive 7. That negative 7 will become a positive 7. So we have 2 answers when we have absolute value. And the answers are negative 7 and 7. So we have 2 answers here. And that is how you use several transformations. And it is lesson 3-3. Thanks for watching.